Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Williams, and I'm a Senior Associate on the CAQH core team. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, Dive into the X12 835 transaction and operating rules. Before we get started, a few logistics. First, this webinar is being recorded. All attendees and registrants will receive a link to a copy of the recording and the slides in the next 1 to 2 business days. While your microphones will be muted during the webinar, we do encourage you to submit a question at any time throughout the webinar. To submit a question, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We'll have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Moving on to the agenda, we'll start with a brief overview of X12 and CAQH Core, and then we'll dive into a discussion on several topics related to the 835 transaction with our expert speakers. We'll wrap things up with a Q&A session and a call to action to highlight how you can get involved. And with that, I'll turn it over to our speakers for them to give a brief introduction, starting with Michelle. Michelle?
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, I'm Michelle Berry with Availity. My role here today with you is to bring that X12 liaison to CAQH role around the 835 and operating rules. So I'm going to hand it off to the expert, the industry experts. Pat?
Hi, thanks, Michelle. So I'm Pat Witek. I've been in healthcare for about 40 years and EDI for about 25 of those. I've had a pretty broad range and background and opportunities to work in hospital IT, clearinghouse, vendor, payers, and also some wonderful consulting work. I currently work for Cognizant and am responsible for the 835 and ESP services for our clients.
Good afternoon.
Bob?
Good afternoon. Thanks, Pat. I'm Bob Bowman. I'm the Principal of Interoperability and Standards here at CAQH on the CORE initiative. I've been with CORE, or with CAQH now, for 16 years. Prior to that, I worked at Humana, a large health plan, as well as a vendor in the space of EDI exchange. So I've been in the healthcare industry for almost 30 years as well. So thank you and good afternoon. We welcome you, and we'll go. I'll hand the call back over to Michelle to give us an introduction on X12.
Great. Thank you, Bob. Just want to say again, thank you for everyone attending today. We are so excited to have this opportunity to take a deeper dive in around X12, the 835, and CAQH's operating rules that complements the 835. A couple of housekeeping items here. First and foremost, again, I am the X12 liaison to CAQH in this particular role, and I didn't go into the length of years or anything like that. So we're going to go past that and talk about some of the disclaimers prior to us presenting today. From an X12 perspective, keep in mind the presentation we're presenting today and will be available for you. Keep in mind this information is for informational purposes only, and it's point in time. So if you think about today and the way the 835 functions and how the operating rules coincide and work well with the 835, just want to make sure that, things can change, right? So we want to make sure that you walk away from today's presentation understanding those really two important points. Last but not least, if you have any questions, we are so interested in hearing from you. Contact us through info@x12.org. And last but not least, come visit x12.org. Take a look at the website. We've made some real estate changes. We've got a lot of great information that's out there as well. And again, just want to bring us together to have this deeper dive discussion. So let's get into it. The next slide, just for 2 minutes, I'm going to talk about X12's background. And if you keep this in your mind around X12, the diverse membership that we have, which includes technologists, it includes business processes, products, and experts in healthcare, also insurance, transportation, finance, government, supply chain, and other industries. So if you think about X12 proper, is what Michelle Berry calls us, that is our diverse group of membership. And again, it's not just technologist, it's also business related as well. X12 also looks at transactions and determines what's best for the industry with those experts. Again, the implementation guides, the tier 3, the technical report type 3s and type 2s, etc., are written based on these industry experts. And again, voices are so important. We've been in the industry for over 40 years, making information, technology, sharing this technology, and moving information through our implementation guides. Yes, you heard it, over 40 years. X12 transactions are also scalable. They support an extremely large amount of transactional data. So it's information that's transmitted. And again, for X12N, which is the insurance side of our X12 proper organization, we've got a lot of information that comes in, goes out. So you can imagine the number of transactions that can surface and move through the industry. Again, keeping in mind, we are an ANSI accredited consensus-based nonprofit organization. And we're really focusing on bringing people together to develop and implement changes around federal, state, local laws that are affecting our standards and the communication, the transactions, the level of information. And keeping in mind also that we look at the opportunity to see these changes come through. So again, we are looking at those opportunities as they continue to come through, different pipelines, different avenues. And again, from a proposed rule to a final rule, we are there to ensure our transactions are making it more cost effective for the healthcare industry to transact level of information. And then the last slide before we get into hearing about the experts, think about our goals. Our goals are specifically to put people in an opportunity where they can transact any level of information, and keeping in mind, standardize that level of information. And we want to make sure from a business perspective that business communications are not interrupted with delays and a broken transaction or a broken communication. We're here to ensure that we help establish keeping those successful lines of communication going. And also keeping in mind that we have built, and X12 is the solid bones in the healthcare industry. X12N, we're the solid bones and trusted and true and tried. So again, from a data exchange perspective, you can imagine, again, 40 plus years of transacting information. We're always open-minded. We always look at the vision with our goals in mind. We look at opportunities to bring together enthusiastic individuals, technologists and business organizations, as well as vendors, clearinghouses, and trading partners, government entities, and other businesses, public health, for instance. Maintain a financial model that helps support reducing medical cost, but also keeping in line with organizations that have to increase their bottom line and making sure that they're not taking deck and just shelving that particular implementation. We're able to reuse and rejuvenate the standards that we have in place today. Keeping in mind, again, this is X12 at the 50,000 foot level. For those of you who have attended our other 3 sessions, we do have a lot more detailed level information about our organization. But again, come out to x12.org, take a look at that information. In the meantime, I am going to turn it over to our industry experts, starting with Bob. Bob?
Great, thank you, Michelle. And as Michelle provided a great overview of what X12 is and what it does and how it does things, I want to do a quick overview also for what CORE and our role in the industry. On the next slide, you'll see that we are a committee of the industry. So we have over 100 participating organizations that sit around our round table, all kind of battling the administrative burdens that both providers and health plans have in the revenue cycle. So we're trying to reduce that burden, and we've been quite successful over the last 20 years that we've been doing this, really helping the industry save those dollars, both through cost avoidance and savings, and how the industry can do things through standards, through operating rules to realize those savings. We have been writing and drafting operating rules for 20 years now, and we have implemented those throughout the industry through two different ways, really, two mechanisms. One, through certification program that entities, including vendors, clearinghouses, and health plans and provider organizations can certify their application, their software, their widget that brings those transactions or that specific data content from the transactions along with the associated operating rules to the industry. 10 of those operating rules have been HIPAA mandated by CMS. So they've been, I guess we would say, they've been so successful that the regulators in DC have brought them to the entire industry for mandated use. We'll walk through some of those, but the ones for our preview today, the 835 and the operating rules associated with them are HIPAA mandated. So we'll have that conversation today, hopefully, around what that mandate means, the impact that has on industry, as well as some new operating rules that we have related to the 835 that are still voluntary, but may have a significant impact on providers, but in a very positive way. On the next slide, you'll see that over the last 20 years, we have been writing operating rules over every segment of the revenue cycle, from eligibility and benefit verification, prior authorization, claims, claim status, payment and remittance advice, benefit enrollment, premium payment. There are sets of operating rules for any and all of those segments of the revenue cycle. So if you're embedded in the revenue cycle, like many of us probably are on today's webinar, there are operating rules and standards related to each one of these components. And using and leveraging those standards and the associated operating rules can really help you save time, money, energy. And we'll talk about this a little bit later about reassociation. How do we bring these two different data segments around with significant burden? Usually, if you do this manually, if you can remove that manual process out, it really does save you a lot of time and money. We'll go ahead and transition into the meat of our discussion today when going into our first topic area. Our first topic area is the 835 and EFT enrollment. I'll start, and please submit questions if you have any questions along the way through our Q&A button that you see at the bottom of your screen. And we have received some questions in pre-registration that people have submitted. We'll address those in these topic areas as we go along. But for this first topic area, it's important to note that the 835 and EFT enrollment was plagued for years and years by every health plan, every entity in this space had a different way of collecting the data and a different request of the provider for what the data needs were. With the operating rules related to EFT and ERA enrollment, we have the industry core has defined specific sets of data for each one of these enrollments. And so if you want to enroll just for the 835 or just for the EFT or for both, the provider has the ability to submit the data electronically to the health plan or to the vendor that might be helping them. Perhaps it's a clearinghouse, but perhaps it's a third-party billing service that's using this data set. They submit the data for uniformity and consistency. It's all the same data to every health plan. The health plan then can update their back-end system with that enrollment data so the provider can receive the 835, they can receive the EFT. That electronic means of collection is really helpful. So providers can do it once, right? Identify this data about themselves one time and use it to submit it to multiple health plans because it's the same data set. So if they're billing claims to 32 different health plans, they know exactly what the data set is for each of these and send that exact same data set to each of those 32 health plans. It's really important to note that these are federally mandated under HIPAA. So this enrollment data sets, as well as electronic process to submit the data, those are required. for health plans to support that in collection of this data set. We recently, just this year, published updates to the operating rules related to enrollment. So these updates are not yet federally mandated, but they are important for any of those health plans or vendors or clearinghouses that wish to pursue core certification. They will need to make adjustments to their systems and applications. Some of the updates are really important, and we looked and focused on, again, some of the provider abrasion in this process and made updates. I want to just highlight a couple of them for you. There's the confirmation of the receipt of the enrollment. So when the provider hits the button to submit the data set to the health plan, there's a way now for the health plan, or requirement for the health plan, to confirm that they've received that data set. So it doesn't fall into a black hole and the provider is just waiting and waiting. And then magically one day, a remittance advice or an 835 or an EFT payment will appear in their bank account. This way they'll know exactly that it's been sent. There's also a confirmation of completion. The health plan will inform the provider that it's complete. They know to expect perhaps the next payment cycle, as that runs through on a Friday at midnight, that Monday they might actually receive an 835. Or as it goes through the EFT banking system through, because of Notch's operating rules, they'll know exactly that the EFT payment's coming in. We also have a new requirement for disclosure of fees. So if there is a fee that a health plan or a vendor assesses on that CCD plus transaction, that EFT transaction itself, that those have to be made available for the providers. They understand the impact that that might have on any future payments that come through the EFT transaction. And last but not least, we also have the final requirement of the health plan or the vendor in this space that's supporting the provider. They have to provide, and I shouldn't say vendor, I should say clearinghouse, a HIPAA covered entity, an opt-in or opt-out requirement if there is an alternative payment option. So the health plan may offer EFT, they may offer a paper check, they may offer a virtual credit card. The provider has to be given the opportunity to either opt in or opt out for which of those services they wish to receive their payments through. So again, ensuring that the system is very clear and open for providers to have not only the data set that they need to be prepared to submit for enrollment, but also what the payment options might be for them when they submit for an enrollment. Again, these are specific for EFT enrollment. There may be other data that's required for a virtual credit card. These rules do not address virtual credit card enrollment. So hopefully no questions generated through that discussion just yet, but we'll, again, if anything does spur, please put in a question in the Q&A, and we can go ahead and move over to the next topic. And the next topic area is related to the provider level adjustments. So I'll hand this back over to Pat for a discussion on this topic.
Great, thanks, Bob. If you don't mind, I wanted to add something related to the enrollment, and you know, sort of related to things that are happening in the industry, especially in recent, you know, events that happened with cyber attacks. When it comes to enrollment, follow the rules. You know, you have all the data to be collected. But something for the providers to keep in mind is when you do that enrollment, you want to do it at the lowest part. And what I mean by that is not just your TIN. You know, you don't want to enroll and say, here's my tax ID. Okay, I want to get everything. If you want to also make sure it's a combination of your NPIs and TIN, so that maybe a specific entity that has its own NPI is getting routed correctly. Enrollment allows for all of that, but it's something that when you sit down and start to, you know, put together that enrollment information, that you want to keep that in mind. Also just want to throw one other note out that WEDI has published a white paper, actually an updated white paper that is about ERA and EFT enrollment process. It talks about issues in the industry, low acceptance, relatively low acceptance of EFT, you know, what to think about if you're a health plan provider, clearinghouse, et cetera. So I just wanted to point that out, that it's a great document, and it's you know, open to the public for viewing. Okay, let's talk about the provider level adjustments. So in the A35, there is a segment called the PLB, provider level adjustments. It is just that. They're not claim specific adjustments. They are things that add or take away money from the payment. But one of the topics that has come up often is that providers would like to track some of those provider adjustments that can be tied back to a claim. And the biggest and most common would be forward balance and overpayment recovery. In the next guide, it has been the front matter section explaining, how you can report these adjustments and what identifiers to use has been updated. It does include the fact that you can actually put in a claim identifier, but that's a future guide. So it was discussed, and everybody said, well, can't we do it today? Isn't there a way that we can tell them to do this today? Because that's really what providers want. And there's something called a request for interpretation that X12, they maintain their sets of questions with answers. They are directly related to the guides, and it's an interpretation. Someone has a question, somebody's not doing something right. How should this be done? So that's really what they're for. And in that request for interpretation is one that refers to this specific situation. Now, I don't have the screens to show you, but Michelle had mentioned x12.org as the website for X12. I'm going to mention it again a little later. Lots and lots of information. If you go to that website, you'll see a major tab for resources. Under resources, you'll see request for interpretation. It gives you a chance to search by maybe a specific number that you're aware of, which I'm going to give you in a second. Or you could put in a search of the PLB segment. It gives lots and lots of great information. In this case, the RFI number that pertains to this is 2370. I'm not going to go into the details of it, but basically there is direction for how to report the billing provider claim ID, so that would be CLP01 in the 835, and the health plan's claim identifier, which would be CLP07, and the check number, check trace number, EFT number. Putting that all together in the reference identifier in the PLB will now allow for providers to be able to track to that lowest level that they have been sort of asking for and probably do themselves, but this should save a whole lot of time and effort. Okay, any questions on that? Like Bob had mentioned, please present them and we can always talk about that a little more. Okay, next discussion, please. Okay, this one's me too, Bob. So let's talk about balancing the transaction. It appears to be very straightforward. The sum of all the claim data plus or minus provider level adjustments equals the payment. But yet in our world today, there's still a lot of transactions that are out of balance. And why is that? A lot of discussion has been ongoing, and it always keeps kind of flowing back to the provider level adjustment. Some of it is there's a lack of understanding on what to report and how to report it. There's always that, as for those of you that are really knee deep in the transaction, that if you put a plus sign, if there's a plus, which is obviously not there, but it means to add, and a negative means to subtract. But in reality, it's the opposite in the EDI transaction. So a negative sign really means you're adding something. So a lot of times the signs are wrong. There's a possibly back-end systems are not storing the information that is needed from adjudication to pull to the 835. And that would be the example we've just talked about. If I create an adjusted claim and I'm taking back money, I originally paid $100, now I'm only paying $75. That provider owes me $25. If there's nowhere to store that level of detail, here's the claim, the date, the transaction, etc., and the amount of $25, then it's really hard to get it on the 835. And so that's one of the common issues that a lot of people talk about. There are other adjustments as well, interest and things like that. But again, it's a lot of times it's that provider level that's offsetting the payment that just doesn't quite come out to balance correctly. Okay, next slide, please.
And
Okay,
I'll jump
Bob, do you want to talk about the rule here, and then I'll
Yeah,
jump in a
definitely.
little bit afterwards.
Yeah,
Great.
for sure. There are specific rules operating rules that CORE produced related to the 835 and the EFT reassociation topic. Again, this isn't a space where the 835 is often generated by the health plan. It comes through your EDI mechanism. Maybe there's a vendor or a clearinghouse that comes to the provider. The health plan or a payment processor may generate the EFT on behalf of the health plan. The health plan generates that and goes through your financial institution because it's a CCD plus transaction. So these two transaction processes are bifurcated. They're split. Different vendors, different people, different entities are involved in generating the 835 as well as the EFT. So when a provider has questions about either one of them, they usually have to direct their questions to different parties or different groups, either at the health plan or with their bank or with other institutions and vendors and clearinghouses within this space. So it's very frustrating for providers. So one of the rules that we generated was a reassociation rule. This reassociation rule defines a specific set of data related to both the 835 transaction as well as the CCD plus transaction that is defined by NACHA. When you combine those two transactions together, you can actually better reassociate these two different transactions for the provider. So the provider can then, when they're posting the 835, then when they post the payments, they can identify the exact specific 835 remittance advice that this payment they received in their bank goes with. So they can post into the AR system that they're managing their members and their providers or patients, their accounts receivable. So it's important to know that this data set is a specific data set that CORE has identified from two pieces of information from the CCD Plus. So it's the effective entry date and the dollar amount, as well as the payment related information from the 835. And there it is. This is really the TRN reassociation trace number segment. So there's 3 or 4, because one of them is a situational data element within the X12 835 that when combined together gives the provider exactly the data that they need for that reassociation. We have identified that and have published that to the industry for use. What that means is that when the provider enrolls for 835 and EFT, we have a requirement that the health plan has to provide this information that this is available to them as an option for the providers. So the providers need to then request this information from their financial institution or from their bank. And they would have to go into the bank basically and request this data set, this reassociation data set, so they can receive this to help them better post to their AR. We've drafted template letters that can be used by the provider. There's a PDF on our website. It's a free resource the providers can use that has all the information that their bank needs about them to request that information. So not only is the data set to allow for the reassociation, there's a tool that allows providers to request that information, and then they can receive that information from their bank and help automate the process of not only posting the 835 and the EFT payment, that CCD plus transaction that came in, but then make sure that they're reassociating the right payment with the right remittance advice. So all really helpful for the provider and some tools that we think that can, again, streamline the adoption of the 835 and the EFT. Pat, I'll pause here. Do you have any additions you want to make to this topic? Pat, you might be on mute if you're chatting.
Oh, sorry, forgot to take off mute. I just wanted to add that, you know, this is a common complaint. Wait, I get my 835 and it has this number, and then I go to my bank and it has this number and I can't see it. And it's because they haven't requested their bank to provide that information, or the NACHA EFT transaction is not doing CCD plus. CCD plus means that there's that extra record in the transaction, a 7 record, that pulls that information that's in the 835. So it's kind of a couple key pieces there to make sure that it's actually working. One is the NACHA transaction actually has the data, and then the bank displays the data. So I just wanted to include that. Thanks, Bob.
No, that's a good point, and it spurred a thought for me as well that some health plans may use something other than the CCD Plus for that transaction for
Right.
NACHA. Many have probably migrated to it because it is now a HIPAA required transaction, but you don't have to use it. Health plans don't have to do it. But if if the provider requests it, then they must be able to receive the CC Plus transaction to get that extra record to get the reassociation data. But there are other NACHA formats that can be used for payments. That maybe one of them is called a CTX transaction. So if your health plan is using that for your payments, you might have trouble getting that reassociation date, the reassociation data that you may need. So work with your health plan to request the CCD Plus so that you can get that data to help reassociate that. And again, there could be trials and tribulations for providers. If you're receiving a virtual card payment, it might not have this information for reassociation either. That can make working your books in the back end and your AR more challenging as well. So again, there's different pros and cons for each method. But the rules that we have written are specific to the CCD Plus transaction. So I can't really address CTX or virtual card payments because we don't have operating rules for those. But guidance for the industry for the use of the CCD Plus may be more helpful because we do have operating rules for those. We do have the 835 standard, and they work really well together, especially because we have this reassociation data set that helps provider, again, match these two transactions and can better post. We can, any other questions from the industry? I don't see any new ones that have come in since our chat. So we move on to the next topic. We may have. I can go ahead and jump in this one too. I know the use of CARCs and RARCs, these are the code system that is part of X12 of the 835 transaction that when paired together, give the provider a meaningful message on why a particular claim or claim line has been adjusted for payment. So it might be because of a contract, it might be because of the contract that the provider has or the provider or the member has with the health plan. These types of adjustments are very common that a health plan will adjudicate the inbound claim and make adjustments to what was billed on the claim from the provider. So very common, everyone sees these every day. We at CORE has defined a set of 4 common business scenarios that many adjustments are made to that claim that this message must come in. And those business scenarios relate to perhaps the data is missing or incomplete on the claim itself, or an attachment is missing that should have been submitted with the claim. So those types of common scenarios and the associated CARCs and RARCs and group codes with them are very common. Again, we've published these for, again, over 10 years now, and we publish a new version every 3 times per year because of the process by which the codes can be updated. 3 times per year, the CARCs and the RARCs can be updated and changed and modified. Both new ones can be added, old ones can be deleted, and existing ones can be modified. So in that process, we ensure that the core code combinations are updated those 3 times per year. We publish those. We work really diligently with the industry to better understand their needs. Not only through those compliance-based reviews, but we also go through a market-based review, and this is every other year. I do want to note that we'll be launching one this year for market-based review to ensure that we're meeting the needs of the market. The health plans develop new and significant types of products and services that they offer to employer groups or to members, and those change quite frequently. You can think about virtual card payments. You can think about value-based care, how that impacts how a provider may bill, and then how that claim is adjudicated. Then that adjudication message has to come back to the provider. Those types of scenarios are important because the industry is ever changing. So we have to be able to change the business scenarios as well as the CARCs and RARCs on a timely basis, almost in real time, to make sure that we're meeting those needs of both the provider as well as the health plan, as well as the member that's receiving care. This particular topic, though, is what about those carks and rights that are not in a core defined business scenario? Well, it's kind of a free game. And I'll say it this way, that there are many scenarios that health plans have to adjudicate a claim. And if they don't fall into the 4 core defined business scenarios, we call them, just for simplicity's sake, proprietary. That's a proprietary adjustment that a health plan is making to the claim, and they can use the CARCs and RARCs that are not already included in a core business scenario for defining what that adjustment really is. And so again, providing that message to the provider who can better work with the member on why that claim was adjusted the way that it was. And some of this could be very specific. It could be we don't have a business scenario that's specific for vision care, for example. So we don't have a business scenario for value-based payment. We don't have a business scenario for perhaps some of these carve-out scenarios, either for specific benefits or specific types of care or specific types of care delivery. So those not included in a business scenario are ones that are kind of, again, free game. They could be used any way that the health plan may need to use them. Unfortunately, there is a little drawback here, because on the core required business scenarios, we do require for any vendors that are using the business scenarios or any clearinghouses, that not only do they have to display the CARC and RARC and group code definitions, they also have to display the business scenario, which is a higher level of message to the provider. So they understand it kind of more immediately that here's a bucket of claims that have been adjusted because they're missing an attachment. Here is a bucket of claims that are missing or are being adjusted because there is missing or invalid data on the claim. And therefore, they can be queued and sent to the right person at the provider's office to work those specific transactions. So it allows for better business intelligence to be driven, even at the provider's office. You can use a better widget to identify those scenarios and work those claims, do that claim rework to fix the bill, resubmit the claim, and have it better adjudicated the next time around. So that with that business scenario definition, it just helps you to work that more cleanly. And if we think about AI and the potential impact AI has when it comes to revenue cycle, payment processing and understanding where the errors are could be more automated if you have really sophisticated business scenarios and the associated CARs or VARTs and group codes with them. So if they're not in our business scenarios, you don't have that higher arching scenario definition. So it makes it more of we call it a dump queue, right? All the things that don't follow the 4 standard go here, and then someone has to kind of more manually process those, because that takes a lot more effort to understand what that scenario is. So that I'll pause here and ask Pat if you have any comments or input as well.
Just that, the reason we wanted to bring this to everyone, to the forefront here is, I know for myself, in talking to a lot of providers, I hear that, well, I can't use that CARC and RARC because it's not in any business scenarios. And we just wanted to make sure you all understood that you can use it. If it clearly falls in a business scenario, then you're obligated to look at the CARCs and the RARCs that are built into that scenario. But if it's something outside of it, you're free to use any CARC and RARC to get the message to the provider, because that's really what we're doing here, right? We're telling the provider why you're not, as a health plan, not paying, the submitted charges. So just wanted to sort of explain why we brought this forward.
Yep. And maybe spread another thought on that is that there isn't a requirement either by X12 or by Core that you have to use the most specific CARC or RARC for the reason for the adjustment. It's just good business practice, right? So we would be both probably advocate that when health plans are determining those potentially internal codes that you have in your adjudication system, you're mapping those to a CARC or to a RARC. try to use the most specific code because it makes it much easier for providers to understand those adjustments that are being made.
Yeah.
And then they can rework the claims or they can better understand the adjustments. So they're not having to do a lot of back end manual processing on their end to adjust a payment, to adjust their AR, to do that in a manual way. If they become more standardized and more uniform, um, at the greater level of detail and granularity, it really helps the entire ecosystem.
Yeah, agreed. And looking at the CARCs and RARCs, just kind of talking generically, there are some CARCs that clearly say you have to use a remark code. That's not always happening, but that's a guide. It's a strong. It's required. It's not even a guidance. It's required that you have to add a RARC. What we do know that happens a lot are payers are just reporting a CARC, like 45 or 96, and not really saying that second level of detail as to why. And that's really what remark cards are. The RARC code set is a second set of messages that give that very detailed message that goes along with the CARC to say this is exactly why you're not getting paid this amount. So it's RARCs tend to be suggestions, but they are actually mandated in some cases, used in the core operating rule business scenarios, used when the CARC code description says use a RARC. But beyond that, they just provide so much information that the provider needs to know. Remember that the A35 is a transaction for the provider, right? And so the information needs to be sent to them as best as possible. So I just wanted to say that because it's kind of one of those problems in the industry that we can continue to talk about.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's often there may not be system intelligence or edits to ensure that just because a CARC says you must use a RARC, that everyone's actually doing it.
Right.
So take that back home for those folks on the call from health plans and for providers that if you're not getting to that level of granularity, it's really impactful because then it almost always becomes a manual process. And again, avoiding that manual process of the provider for posting payments and the reason for the adjustments, that's at every line, that's at every claim that they would have to touch. So it becomes really, really burdensome really, really quickly.
Yeah, just add one more thought. If a provider sends a claim, gets rejected, and they get back that very, very detailed reason why, they can easily resubmit the claim. They can fix the problem, resubmit it, and hopefully get paid. If they're not getting that detailed level, they have no idea what they can do to fix the claim and resubmit it and potentially actually get paid for it. So that's where a lot of the rework and questions and phone calls come into play, or providers just throw up their hands and say, well, I don't know what's wrong. Oh, well, I'm just going to write this off. And they're missing out on getting some of that reimbursement that they're entitled to.
Right. Yep. Very good point. Maybe we move on to the next topic.
Okay. Okay. This one's me. Lots of conversations have been going on the last couple of years about, accessing the guides. We know traditionally that X12 offered the PDF versions for 5010, and they're still absolutely valid. But the go forward is an online tool, and it's called Glass. You can work with the X12 organization to get a subscription. You can see the guides online. It's very cool and slick. You're clicking through, you can expand and subtract, you can click on segments and elements and notes, and it's just very, very interactive. It is their go forward and only way that you will be able to get access to the transactions. All the guides are from version 5010 through the current version, which is 8040, are available. Now, if you have trouble sleeping one night and you want to grab your laptop and start, kind of scanning through all of the different versions and guides, please enjoy that. But they're all there, and as each new version is published, it's available. and it continues to expand as those transactions, as changes are made, update notes and segments and elements and everything. So each version is updated. One of the things I want to note, I don't unfortunately have a slide to show you, but in the latest version of the A35, there is an appendix that was added, and I encourage any of you that have glass to go and look at it in 8030 and 8040, actually. It's an appendix, and it is a CARC-RARC mapping tool. Hopefully, maybe if we do another one of these sessions, we can be able to show everybody what it looks like, but please go look if you have access. So it lists every CARC, descriptions and information about it. It gives a list of remark codes that can be used with the CARC. But in addition to that, it also indicates which of those CARC-RARC combinations are in a core business scenario. So you would see extra remark codes because they don't maybe don't fall into the business scenario 3. They kind of are a different, message than what business scenario 2 or 3 are, for example. But it indicates that core. So it ends up being a pretty cool tool. Not only say, well, gee, I have this question, what can I use CARCs and remarks generically? But then it also guides you and tells you which ones are in the operating roles, which then, gives different flavor on which code you should be using then. So again, I encourage, if anybody has access, to please go look at it. And it also has some pharmacy information in there. And additionally, property and casualty. We've expanded it to include those 2 sets as well. Okay, next topic or next guide or next slide. All right, let me continue down this path a little bit. So beyond the glass, which is a separate tool, X12, I'm going to point to the X12 website, which is x12.org, very simple. As Michelle mentioned in the very beginning, I also recommend that you browse the website. There's so much information, and it continues to grow. And for example, if you wanted to learn a bit about this tool called Glass, under products, there's information how you would be able to access it and figure out what a subscription would cost, etc. If you're interested in understanding what changes have been applied between 5010 and the current guides for the 835 and 837, there was something called difference reports. They list every change, and not necessarily the details of it, but sort of tell you where the changes are. You would go under product. No, I'm sorry. You would go. It's a different location. Under news and events, and then there's a topic that contains the X12 recommendations to NCVHS and the letters that were sent. There's a little purple box on the right, and then under there you'd see different summaries. So that would give you an idea. You look at some of those, and it's daunting because there's thousands of changes, but realize that there's just natural cleanup that occurs. Maybe a note, same note, but it was just rewritten to be more effective. So even though there's lots and lots of good changes, they're not all necessarily something that impacts the transaction when the day comes that we implement it. Okay, so x12.org has a plethora of information. Let me think what else. Most of you probably know to go there for the code list if you need the CARCs and the RARCs and any other code lists. Actually, the next slide, I think right after this, there may be, if you want to, yeah, there you go. So you would, on the X12 site, at the top, you'd say references. This is just one example. And then in that references, you'll see the list of all the different code lists that X12 supports, or they just help publish for the industry. All the current code sets are there. And you'd also see a list of the code lists that will be for future guides. Some of the code lists that you're used to seeing in the guides today are literally in the standard. We've taken many of those code lists and made them an external list so they can be updated on a regular basis. Much like you think of the CARCs are updated 3 times a year, a lot of the other code lists now can be updated. I mentioned earlier about an RFI, request for information. So just to kind of reiterate, there information related to the meaning, use, and interpretation of X12 standards, which are the technical report 3. That's another way for standards, or what we call them guides, or implementation guides, we call them rather. So it's basically a person asks a question, and then the X12 entity side of it will answer that question. Those can be found under, actually you can't see it here, but under resources. If y'all see kind of on the right top, it says resources. You find something like that under there. Another cool tool that has been and will continue to develop are examples. So you have an example in the guides. If you're familiar with it, implementation guides, for every segment, you see a little example of what the segment looks like. But these examples are based on a use case, and they would include the entire transaction from ISA through IEA and everything in between, that would show you how to build a transaction for whatever that specific use case is. Very, very powerful tool, especially for beginners who are really trying to learn, or maybe something new has come up in your business and you've never reported it on an A35. These examples are not just A35, they're all of the transactions. And another example would be under that resources is also something called forms. It includes every form known to the X12 world on submitting for a request or an update. Maybe you want a new code added. It actually, I think, includes the request to get glass. I mean, it's sort of just a master list of every way to request something from X12. So there's some of the highlights. There's so much more that you could probably explore and find on your own. But that's what I kind of wanted to present that. And I'm going to stop here. And I think that gives us some time for questions. Bob, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything else at this point.
No, I think we've got a few questions that have come in, so let's just dive right in. The first one here I'll look at is, if something like a provider vendor interest payment that would generate a check or an EFT, but with no associated claim specifically, should the 835 be sent for that scenario? From a balancing perspective, does it make sense unless you have some sort of offset in the PLB with no CLP data? Does it make sense, Pat, the questions coming in?
Yeah, it does. So the 835 is actually created in a way that you can have what's called Table 1, which is where you report your payment information, your trace number, and Table 3, which is where you report the provider level adjustment, which in this case would be nothing but an interest check. So yes, you do not have to have any claim data. Now, typically interest is applied to a claim, right? That's more of a common scenario. You'd have a claim payment, or a claim that got paid, and oh, by the way, here's the interest. But if you're generating just a check for interest, an 835 can be used with just that Table 1 and Table 3.
Great. Another question that has come in, maybe related to the GLASS tool. Are the values for the CARCs and WARCs also updated 3 times per year during the compliance-based review?
So the GLASS tool is to access the transactions. You would go to the X12 website, x12.org, and under that slide that we presented one back, under the resources, and that's where you would see all of the updated code lists. And they are updated on those dates. I think for CARCs, it's like March, July, and November 1st or something like that. So that's where you would see code updates.
Then another question came in about the GLASS tool. Will a search function related to like a word search, they're having trouble finding, identifying, or searching through the tool, like using a word, like they can, like a document, like a PDF? What's the best way to use the GLASS tool itself? Maybe it's a recommendation.
So, sure. So there is some search capabilities. Without me showing you, it's a little hard, but I'll try to describe it. So let's say you open up the 835 transaction in GLASS, and each of the loops has the little plus sign to expand it. If you were to expand the entire transaction, and there's actually a button to do that, then you could say basically Control F for search, and you could put in a word or a segment or something that you're looking for. So there is a way to search through the transaction. It's I don't want to say it's not obvious at first, but if you realize you expand and then you do, you know, just like I said, Control F for search, it'll let you search.
And it's a great feature to have. It doesn't matter if it's the 835 or
Yeah,
if it is another transaction, that Control F function allows you to
Yep.
search. Yeah.
yeah. The key is that you expand all. That's
Right,
the key to it.
right.
You first start by expanding all in your transaction, which when you kind of see it, the left side is here's the format of the transaction, you know, loops and segments. At the very top, it would say expand all. You just click that once and then you can search.
Right, and another question came in that I'll take, and that was related to the resources or tools that CAQH publishes related to the reassociation. In that topic area, I mentioned that there is a template letter that a provider can send to their bank requesting the reassociation information. We'll include that link in our follow-up email. We'll try to send that link either directly to the questioner or include that as a highlight in our thank you email along with a link to the webinar today. I know we are running out of time, so let me move on to our next topic, which is our wrap up. We want to make sure that both X12 as well as CAQH would like to have a call of action. If you're interested in being part of the conversations related to the CARCs and RARCs, for example, or any of the other rural development efforts we have, please become a core participant. Or if you are a core participant and you're not engaged, please become engaged. We want to make sure that we have that plethora of experiences that everyone has in the industry to bring that into the conversations. If you're a vendor, clearinghouse, or a health plan, become core certified to ensure that you're in conformance with the data that's coming in from the transactions along with the operating rules, and also be an advocate. Work with us as we measure the impact that we have on the industry. With that, I'll hand the call back over, I believe, to Michelle to have their call of action.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate it. And you and Pat do such a wonderful job of bringing everybody together, explaining exactly how organizations function throughout the industry and bringing like minds together. So collectively, what we can do is become a member. If you're not already a member from an X12 perspective, feel free, reach out to x12.org, or if you have questions, go to info.x12.org. And again, look at our participating standing meetings, or if you're interested in joining the 35 work group, for instance, feel free to browse the site so that you can take a look at the information around participation. And last but not least, any requests that you may have, feel free to reach out. We want to hear from organizations, again, providers, health plans, payers, vendors, clearinghouses. And again, it's all of us together making that next step, making change happen collectively. Last but not least, X12 is listening. So again, feedback, feedback, feedback. Anything that you have for us, we're interested in listening. Go to x12.org, provide your suggestions, feedback, insight. And again, we look at this information on a consistent basis and we do respond. So don't think it's going into just an email box. We are looking at the information and we do respond collectively. So again, just want to say thank you for joining us today. I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah, I believe, in closing out.
Indeed. Thank you, Michelle. And thank you to all of you who have joined us today. Have a great rest of your afternoon, and please reach out to us if you need more information.